Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome back to another wonderful episode of Two Sons Podcast. That is right, you have heard me correctly when I say that. Welcome back to another episode of Two Sons Podcast. So, guys, it has definitely been a while. It's probably been a good month, about a month, maybe a month and a half since I have produced a lovely podcast episode for you guys. Partially that's my fault, obviously. I have gotten super busy when it comes to work, and there was just a lot going on towards the end of May, especially the whole month of June. There was my birthday. My mom came down to visit for 2 weeks. There was just a lot going on. So I got super busy, I got super distracted, and honestly, I started getting somewhat of a social life. So that kind of focused more of my attention on my days off than sitting in front of my computer and doing a podcast episode. So the last one that I think I did for everybody was my Revenge of the Sith review after I saw it in theaters for the 20th anniversary, right? Yeah, looking at the poster, the 20th anniversary. And that was like over a month ago. So I apologize. I have definitely been lacking, and obviously you can see that today has not been any better. I am all disheveled. I'm still in my pajamas. Today was also my day off, but I did a lot of cleaning, did a lot of laundry. So before I honestly run out of energy and fall asleep tonight, I thought I would sit down and at least record an episode of the podcast so I could start putting out episodes for you guys. Because there have been some movies that I've seen, obviously, since the last episode that I have yet to talk about. And I'm a little behind, obviously. But I'm hoping that you guys will tune in nonetheless and you will enjoy what I'm putting out. Overall, I won't spend too much time on how I'm doing, but overall, I'm doing pretty okay. The last couple of days have been kind of rough. Wasn't really getting too much sleep. So my body is still definitely recovering from that. So that has definitely still been a challenge, for sure. But other than that, thankfully, work, my social life, everything else in my life is going relatively good. I've had a pretty good start to the summer so far, and there is definitely a lot to look forward to for the rest of July going into August. So I'm just trying to focus on that and just kind of focus on catching up on some sleep and just kind of getting back into my daily routine, like I always do. But yeah, if you guys are wondering why I decided to make the decision to go back to Two Sons Podcast, I was giving it some thought, and me and my brother kind of laid a foundation for a podcast and what we wanted our podcast to be. And unfortunately, even though he cannot do it anymore, I want to keep the legacy alive. And I mean, sure, making it my own podcast, giving it my own name, kind of rebranding it, it made sense in the beginning. But at the end of the day, I could still make it my own podcast. I could still do my own thing, but keep the legacy of Two Sons Podcast and what me and my brother set out to do alive, and just kind of continue our legacy, by myself. Um, and that was really what made me make that decision, basically. So I want to continue to honor where this podcast started, what this podcast is supposed to be about. And even though it's just me now, this will always be Two Sons Podcast, where you guys could come and escape and just enjoy some good quality content. Watch me just go over for 20-25 minutes, go over a review on a movie and call it a day. I mean, we're not the most sophisticated over here. I'm using a combination of my iPad and my computer to kind of bring out these episodes to you guys. So I'm not the most tech savvy, I'm not the most extroverted, or popular, I guess, over the computer or over the screen, but I do my best. And at the end of the day, I really enjoy bringing out these episodes to you guys. And, it helps me get a little bit out of my shell. So thank you guys for all your continued support. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you guys continue to come back because I am going to have some pretty good episodes for you guys going into the future. Today we're going to be talking about Thunderbolts, which obviously came out earlier in the spring of 2025. So that's that's kind of how far back we're going here. But I also plan on doing an episode on 28 years later. I plan on doing one on the F1 movie, and then obviously the whole month of July we have Jurassic World Rebirth, we have Superman, and then we have Fantastic Four. So there's going to be a lot of good content coming out the rest of the month and the rest of the summer, as a matter of fact, for you guys. So please just keep those notifications on. Follow me on Instagram as well as TikTok under Two Sons Podcast. That is with an O, not a U, because we are two brothers. And you'll stay up to date on all the episodes that I post. You'll get the notifications, and obviously, if you want to find out where you could watch this wonderful podcast, I am on YouTube at Two Sons Podcast. Again, that is with an O, not a U, because we are two brothers. So check me out on YouTube, on Instagram, and TikTok. Now that I got my whole lovely spiel out of the way, we're going to dive into today's episode. And the episodes going forward are going to be relatively simple. It's going to be the same kind of song and dance that I usually do. But I'm going to try to make the videos a little bit shorter for you guys. Something that is, watchable in like a 20-25 minute span. Maybe you put it on the background when you're cleaning, doing laundry or you're eating or whatever. I don't want to sit here for an hour and, dive extremely deep into, these movies, and it helps me produce, podcast episodes for you guys, and then it also helps you guys be able to sit there and kind of like, take in what I'm trying to do, and so on and so forth. So that's going to be the format going forward. The episodes are still going to come out every Monday around 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. So like I said, just follow me on those socials and you'll get the notifications and the posts when the episode drops. And like I said, they should be coming out every Monday. So by the time that I'm speaking to you, this episode will be out tomorrow on July 7th. So from July 7th to the foreseeable future, there will be an episode out every Monday at noon. So like I said, definitely just follow me on Instagram and TikTok. You'll get the notifications and you'll see the post for when I drop a new episode, and then you guys can go check it out on YouTube. So, like I said, we are going to be discussing Thunderbolts today. So Thunderbolts came out, when did Thunderbolts come out? It's a great question, Philip. So Thunderbolts came out back in May of 2025. And this might seem a little silly, but I actually am going to sit here and I'm actually going to just double check that I have not done an episode on this already. Okay, cool. All right, so I have not done an episode on this already, so we are in good shape. Honestly, it's been so long I kind of forgot what I did episodes on and what I didn't do episodes on. So this movie released May 2nd of 2025, so it released obviously about 2 months ago to the day, and it was one of Marvel's first projects to kind of bring in the new year. I don't think there were any Marvel projects in the beginning of the year. If anything, they weren't very noteworthy. So far this year from Marvel, we have had Thunderbolts. We just had the Ironheart series wrap up the other day on Disney Plus. I did watch that and everything, so if you guys are interested to see what my thoughts and opinions are on that show, please let me know, and I will do a quick video on it, just kind of going over the show and my thoughts and opinions and everything. But then, towards later in the summer, we also have the Fantastic Four, and then that might be it. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not too familiar with the Marvel lineup for the rest of 2025, but it might be relatively light this year. But Thunderbolts was one of the first projects that kind of kicked off the year for Marvel. Overall, we're going to go into, some of the scores, what the critics gave it. Obviously, we're going to go over some of the cast and, how much money it made, and then we're going to go into the pros and cons like we usually do. So like I said, this movie came out on May 2nd of 2025. It had a content rating of PG-13, of course. It was directed by Jake Schreier. And if you're curious what he produced movies such as I Could See You. Is that his only movie? Okay, that might be his only movie. Okay, so it does not seem like the Thunderbolts had a very well-known director, but nonetheless, it was directed by that lovely man. We're going to go into some of the scores real quick. We're going to look at all the, the main critic websites and whatnot. Obviously, we focus on Rotten Tomatoes more heavily here at Two Sons Podcast, but we also look at IMDb and Metacritic as well. So IMDb gave it a 7.5 out of 10, which, overall is a pretty average rating for a Marvel movie. Obviously, that 7.5 is kind of leaning more towards like an above average versus average, which would kind of be like a 7 out of 10. So overall, decent score from IMDb. Metacritic kind of on the same path, maybe a little bit lower. It's giving it a 68 out of 100. So again, more along that average or, above average type rating. Now, to the real bread and butter here, we're going to be talking about the Rotten Tomatoes scores for Thunderbolts. So overall, Thunderbolts actually did extremely well when it came to these scores for both the tomato meter, which is the critics, and the popcorn meter, which is the audience. So the critics have given it a certified fresh rating of about 88%, which is absolutely phenomenal for a Marvel project. Going into this year, of course. Um, the audience also gave it a verified hot popcorn meter of about 93%. So overall, between the critics and the audience, overall it was given great scores. So I mean, we're looking at this. We're looking at a B plus. We're looking at an A minus. We're looking at an A. So overall, great scores for this project. So all across the board so far, we have relatively average and above average scores from all the major critic websites. Obviously, Rotten Tomatoes, both critics and audience blew it out of the park, gave it very phenomenal ratings. So overall, we are on good track so far when it comes to the Thunderbolts, and then also, how well this movie did. So we're going to go over a little bit of the cast here because we do have some returning actors and actresses from other Marvel projects and some new people to this movie. So obviously we have Florence Pugh returning as Yelena Belova. We have Sebastian Stan playing Bucky Barnes. We have Julia Louis-Dreyfus playing Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. We have Louis Pullman playing Robert Reynolds, who also plays the Sentry in The Void in the movie. We have David Harbour returning his role as Alexei. We have Wyatt Russell playing John Walker. Hannah Joan Common playing Ava Starr. And see if anybody else is relatively noteworthy. And overall, that's pretty much it. So again, a couple of major actors and actresses returning roles from previous Marvel projects, and just some major actors and actresses that haven't been in Marvel projects before. So overall, great cast and crew altogether. Now we are going to shift over focus real quick to the box office because we do all this in real time because we are a amateur podcast. Okay, so let's see. Now that we got all the cast and crew out of the way, we got the rating, the release date, and we got all the critic scores and reviews out of the way. Now we're gonna look deeper and we're gonna see just how well Thunderbolts did at the box office. So, according to recent statistics, the budget for this movie was about $180 million. Currently at the box office, and I think officially at the box office because Thunderbolts is no longer in theaters, I believe, the movie was sitting at about $382 million. So, this movie made about twice its budget, technically. If you take 180 and then you do 280, so... Yeah, it made roughly around 2 times its budget, which overall, again, we always love how a movie makes its budget back and then some. Now, what's interesting about this is that the reviews and the ratings are all great. They're all super positive. Again, they're in the 80s, they're in the 90s. Everybody seemed to love this movie on paper. However, the box office report does not exactly translate that to numbers because again, with a budget of $180 million for a Marvel project, we're only sitting at $382 million. So the Thunderbolts was not even able to break $500 million. Again, obviously, we're very proud that they made their budget back and then some. But again, unfortunately, the box office is not translating with the scores and the ratings that we saw and we discussed earlier. So for a Marvel project, it is a little disappointing, that they have such a low box office. However, you could take that with a grain of salt because of the fact they have such great reviews. And again, you'd rather have a pretty good movie, a pretty good Marvel movie to kind of start out 2025, start Marvel on a high note, than have a cruddy movie that just makes millions of dollars, right? Because we're looking for quantity, we're looking for quality over quantity here, right? So in 2025, Marvel doesn't have that many projects going on, so this is kind of the year to kind of, ease everybody into it, put their players kind of into place, and then really hit home, next year with Avengers Doomsday and, all their other projects that they have slated for next year. So again, so far we come to the understanding that we have a fantastic Marvel movie that has great ratings, right? By both audience and critics. It has an amazing cast and crew. Some people that have been in Marvel before, others that it's their first time. And we see a movie that's made back their budget and maybe a little bit more than double of it. So overall, everything is slowly trending positive and is on the right foot, right? However, we all know here at Two Sons Podcast that, even though there are pros, there are also cons. And now this is the part where we kind of get into our bread and butter, and then we start to discuss what were some of the pros and then what were some of the cons of this wonderful movie. So, like we always do here, we're going to start off with some of the cons because we always like to end the episode on a high note, so we're going to finish with the positives. So, a couple of cons that, myself and other people found when watching Thunderbolts was it had a weak first act. So, the setup is slow and bogged down by bureaucratic subplots and underwhelming reunions. I could definitely understand this for sure. It has been a while since I've seen the movie, but, the first act is definitely a little bit more slow paced, right? You're kind of being reintroduced to all the characters, some characters some characters that you don't. And basically, the whole first act is basically setting the story, setting the plot, and then having all these characters that we're familiar with kind of finally reunite and then be put together to continue the story forward. So, from more of like an action, like high paced like standpoint, yes, obviously it is very slow. It's a little underwhelming. It's a little boring. Um, However, I don't think that is necessarily a con because, from the moment they all come together and they meet, going forward for the rest of the film, I think it's pretty fantastic. So if you can kind of get over the hump of the first act, just being a little slow, having it be dragged on, and you could just really, move forward and then focus on the rest of the film after that, I think you're really going to enjoy the film. But again, obviously with a Marvel movie, it's a superhero movie. It's supposed to be action. It's supposed to be adventure. So having kind of a slow, kind of like almost like yawn build up in the first act is definitely not the way to grab the audience's attention and kind of reel people in. But again, for this movie, I think it worked. And again, I think the slow pace in the first act helps pay off the rest of the movie. But again, it is a con because not everybody, wants to get their butts in the seat and then just kind of be like bored to death for the first act of the movie. So, another point that other people definitely found was an underdeveloped villain. So, Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, while intriguing, lacks the menace or depth of a compelling antagonist. She reminded me very much of like a Zemo, someone that was kind of like, just behind the scenes, like pitting people against each other, like, doing what she had to do for her own gains and for her own agenda and whatnot. Yes, she is definitely underdeveloped as a villain for sure, but honestly, the whole entire time I was watching the film, I knew that at the end of the day, the Void was going to be the main antagonist and the villain of this movie, so I wasn't really looking at her as a villain. But if you want to consider her a villain, then yes, she is very off-screenish. I mean, she kind of appears here and there. There's like some sort of like subplot or sub-story going on with her throughout the whole entire film, but, nothing really like life-changing or drastic, happens because of her. I mean, if anything, yes, obviously events that she puts in place behind the scenes, or what we see in the movie, obviously helps develop, Robert into the Sentry and then obviously into the Void as well. And then obviously those have drastic consequences that lead until the conclusion of the final act. So yes, you could also blame her for those. But overall, she is very underdeveloped. And again, you would definitely consider the Void more the villain of this movie than Valentina. So, another point we saw was a continuity overload. So the film assumes viewers are familiar with multiple MCU shows and films, making it confusing for casual fans. So yes, of course, with the Thunderbolts, you're going to have characters from all different types of Marvel projects. You have characters from the Black Widow movie. You have returning characters from Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You have characters from Ant-Man and the Wasp. So if you are just kind of a casual fan of superheroes, of Marvel, and you don't really keep up with these shows on Disney Plus or any of the other movies, it is going to be a little confusing because you definitely are going to be like, oh, who's that? Who's that? Who's that? However, the only rebuttal that I have to this point is that if you are a fan of Marvel, if you are a fan of DC, then you should be aware that, unfortunately, when it comes to some of these projects, at least this late in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that there are going to be characters that tie in to previous movies and TV shows. And unfortunately, if you're not aware of that, then that's kind of your own fault, to be honest. Unfortunately, with how deep the MCU is in the last decade or so, you can't just be a casual fan. If you're going to watch a project and you don't know any of the characters, your best bet is to definitely just do a quick YouTube video like search and kind of get some backstory and understanding of these characters before you go into the movie. That way you could definitely grasp and enjoy it more. So yes, this is a con because again, anybody that just wants to go see a casual superhero movie, maybe somebody thinks this is kind of like Suicide Squad from DC, they'll be like, yeah, sure, let me go see this, and then they won't have any idea who the characters are, and then because of that, obviously they can't latch onto them and get attached to them, and obviously grow to love them and stuff like that. So I could see why that would put a sour taste in people's mouth. However, with a franchise so established such as the MCU, which has been pumping out movies since the early 2000s, it's kind of assumed now that there are going to be projects in it that are going to have characters from other projects. And if you're not following, then that's kind of your own fault. But again, for the general audience and the general viewer, I could definitely see why this is a con. The last 2 points that we have here are uneven pacing, so some plot points feel rushed or unexplored, especially in the middle section. This is relatively true. One of the cons that I did have with this film is that I wish Sentry slash The Void would have used their powers and like foresight to go deeper into the different backstories and the events of these characters. Now, yes, we've seen some of these backstories and character stories in other projects before, but this would have been a great way to kind of bring some of these casual fans into the MCU and into Marvel further by giving us a generic backstory and like a generic trauma dump of each of these characters throughout the film. That way it kind of allows you to connect more personally with these characters, and besides the spotlight just being on maybe like John Walker or Yelena, it kind of brings the whole team together because you're getting like a separate backstory for each character. And again, yes, obviously some of these characters like like Bucky, and Alexei and John Walker, and Ava, we all know their past, right, from either their own TV shows or movies. But again, if you're a casual fan, you're not going to. So I think, just like how it happened for Yelena and John Walker in the film, I think each of these characters should have had a moment where they kind of glimpsed back into their past, because I think it would have just made those characters a lot more relatable, and it just would have made for a little bit more of an interesting segue. Because again, a lot of the middle act is like these characters trying to come together as a team and like try to understand each other and connect. So I think each of them having a glimpse back into their past and their trauma would have helped them come together, which would have been a perfect segue into the finale of this film. So I could definitely see why this would be an issue for sure. Finally, whether this is a con or not, but we have the marketing versus the reality. So the trailers didn't fully capture the tone or depth of the film, leading to misaligned expectations. Yes and no. I mean, again, I don't think the trailers really showed too much, to be honest. So, I'm not really much of a trailer guy. I like to just kind of go into a project blind and not really kind of understand what's going on or, whatever. So I don't really agree with this, but however, I mean, again, trailers nowadays are not the best and they will show most of the film in the trailers. So if you were expecting a little bit more of like a Suicide Squad story, I think that was just kind of your own fault and your own perception. And I think a lot of people going in, when they heard of the Thunderbolts, they're just like, oh, it's like the Suicide Squad for DC, right? So there was a lot of misconception going into the movie before it was even released. But this one is kind of like a hit or miss. Like, I can understand why, but, I don't think it's as big of a con as something like the uneven pacing or the, weak first act or whatever. So overall, looking at the cons here, we see that they're relatively minor. Underdeveloped villain, people might be confused if they're just a general fan, maybe some pacing issues, but overall, those are things that kind of happen in generic movies altogether. So those are pretty good cons to have for a Marvel movie going in. Now, we're going to go to everybody's favorite part, and we're going to talk about the pros of the Thunderbolts. So obviously, we're going to look at strong performances, right? So Florence Pugh, Sebastian Stan, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus received praise for their nuanced portrayals. I think everybody, cast and crew, no matter what character it was, I think they all gave a very strong performance, and they all really latched on to their own character. And then that's what made this group of characters so likable, is by the end of the movie, you were sitting there and you're like, oh man, like I hope these characters survive, like going into like, the latter MCU, like I hope they survive, Secret Wars, and I hope they survive Doomsday. And you started to really care about these characters towards the end of the film, and I think that's just because of their own individual performances. And that is definitely something to commend. And again, a lot of people are going to see this movie, or they saw this movie because of their favorite characters, like, Bucky Barnes or, Yelena Belova were in this movie. And, they give such a commanding and they give such an individual performance for these characters that you can't help but fall in love with them. So that definitely is a pro for this movie for sure. Another point we have here is a character-driven story. So the film focuses on flawed, morally gray characters, offering a refreshing break from traditional superhero archetypes. So again, this point is very similar to Suicide Squad, where they kind of had the same premise going on in Suicide Squad. But again, it is a nice change of pace because, again, these characters are morally gray. They're not exactly superheroes, but they're not exactly villains either. They all have their troubled past and trauma. So again, it just kind of goes hand in hand with their strong performances, and it allows you to kind of like feel for them, get to know them as characters, and then kind of fall in love with them, towards the end of the film. Emotional depth was definitely another strong point in this movie. Themes like mental health, grief, and redemption are explored more deeply than in many recent MCU entries. This is very true. There was a part in the final act where it did really get to me, to be honest. The whole character of Bob and the Sentry in the Void is one big mental health case. A lot of the characters, such as Florence Pugh, they were going through their own grief and redemption. And again, these 3 points, these 3 beginning points, tie perfectly in with one another, and that's what made this such a strong film. And again, some people might be like, oh, well, I can't believe that's how they, defeated, the Sentry or the Void, towards the end of the film by using the power of friendship and exploring mental health. Yes, I understand it's not like the MCU of old where we did a lot of punching and kicking and shooting, to defeat the bad guys, but for this character, for the Sentry and the Void specifically, I think it makes total sense, and I think they did a great job exploring that and using that in the final act. And again, if anybody knows Sentry or the Void from the comics, you know that is a perfect representation of mental health, and grief, and I think they did a really phenomenal job, tackling it the way they did in the movie. Another strong point we have was the anti-hero ensemble. So these team-ups of lesser-known or previously sidelined characters like Ghost, U.S. Agent, and Red Guardian gives the film a gritty underdog energy. Again, very similar to Suicide Squad, kind of has the same mentality where, they're kind of giving some of these supporting characters, these sideline characters, the spotlight. And again, it just allows you to appreciate them more and just kind of grow with them more as characters when maybe you didn't really connect with them in their other projects because, they were kind of like side characters. Obviously Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier are the main characters, and then the U.S. Agent is kind of like a side character. Ghost is a side character in Ant-Man and the Wasp. The Red Guardian, again, side character in Black Widow. So bringing these characters to the forefront and kind of making them main antagonists or main protagonists, definitely allows you to connect with them and, grow with them throughout the film. Another point we have here is a grounded final act. So unlike many MCUs that end in CGI-heavy battles, Thunderbolts concluded with a more emotionally grounded climax. Again, I think how they tied in mental health to the final act was a great way to conclude the movie. And yes, it was a nice change of pace to not get a huge, drawn-out CGI battle like in other projects. Again, those projects are done very well, and those CGI battles are really cool. But it is a nice change of pace to have more of a grounded, more mental health, real life final act in a Marvel movie than a big giant CGI battle. And again, I think emotionally grounded climax is a great way to kind of describe the finale. And again, their use of mental health, towards the Void and the Sentry, and just how all the characters come together, is just a great way to end the movie. And they really do nail it in the final act, to be honest. And that's why I said before, with the slow pace in the first act, is that if you can get through the slow pace and the little bit of the boringness of the first act, it makes the middle and the final sequence in the final act just that much perfect, because I think just the way it builds throughout the entire film is just perfect. The final point that we have here is a return to form. So some critics see this as a return to early MCU storytelling, prioritizing character arcs over franchise building. I definitely agree with this for sure. This definitely did give me some reminders of a Captain America or a Thor or an Iron Man, where these projects in the very beginning focused more on the character, kind of telling their story, their personality, their backstory, making you kind of fall in love with them, without worrying about how is this going to tie into the overall franchise. Obviously, we do see in some post-credit scenes that obviously the Thunderbolts do become the new Avengers. So they are going to tie into bigger storylines going down the road. However, it wasn't very forced. The Thunderbolts were still able to tell their own story without having it connect to the wider MCU. And that definitely is a return to some earlier forms of the MCU, and that's what made the MCU so great in the very beginning. And again, unfortunately, it lost a lot of that luster when you had so many characters and you were trying to pick them from like left and right and like put them in projects and be like, okay, how does this character connect to this character? And that's when the MCU kind of started to fall apart. But this was definitely a return to form. It was definitely a nice little piece of nostalgia. And again, I'm just excited to see where these new Avengers and Thunderbolts are going to be going forward. But that is going to be it for today's episode, guys. That was basically all the pros and cons that I wanted to discuss. Like I said, in my own words, I think it was a great movie. I'm going to give it a solid 8.5 out of 10 suns. I think it was absolutely phenomenal. I think for the first Marvel project of the year, I think it's definitely a great way to enter 2025 and start Marvel on a pretty high note. Again, it does have I wouldn't say weak first act, but I would say kind of a slow, mundane first act. But if you can get through that and then you kind of get to them like built as a team, I think, the middle sequence and then the final act is really what puts the cherry on top for this movie. And if you look at it all together with the character building, being able to relate to them more on a personal level, and then just a little bit of like a nostalgia or like return to like classic MCU, it does make a phenomenal movie. And I did really enjoy it. I mean, I saw it twice and I had the same complaints leaving, both times. So I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great. If you guys have not checked it out yet, if it still is playing in any theaters by you, I highly recommend going to see it. If not, I'm sure it'll be streaming on Disney Plus relatively soon. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. But yeah, like I said, I mean, I think it's a solid 8.5 out of 10 suns. I would love to know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you guys thought, what you thought, what your pros, what your cons were, and, what you're looking forward to seeing from these characters in the future. But with that being said, if you guys want to know where you can find this wonderful podcast and find this episode when it comes out, like I said earlier, you can follow me on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, all under Two Sons Podcast. That's with an O, not a U, because we are two brothers. So again, these episodes will come out on Monday. So just keep those notifications on, watch those socials, and I will post to them. And then you guys can sit down and watch this wonderful episode. But again, thank you guys so much for your patience, for your love, for your understanding. It is definitely nice to be back. I'm excited to go over some other movies that I saw so far this summer that have been really awesome and really amazing. And again, we have a lot to look forward to for the rest of July and even some movies in August. So it's definitely going to be a great summer for the podcast going into the fall and the winter. So I'm excited to take the ride with you guys. And again, thank you so much for coming out. Whenever you're watching this, I hope you have a great morning, great afternoon, and great evening. Please be safe. Do not do anything stupid. And I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.